Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. So we finally made it here. You've all been waiting for it. No, some of you have been waiting for it. A guide to Swans. Swans are a band that have gone on an incredible journey since their first album, Filth, in 1983. Ever-changing lineups, hugely shifting, contrasting music. Bleh. Not really sure what that word was, to be honest, but I think it effectively describes my thoughts when I started initially putting notes together for this guide. Swans are such a unique experience to listen to. Their music is at turns violent, abstract, hypnotic, ethereal, and I've doubted my ability to put the experience across into words. I'm going to give it a damn good go though, so wish me luck. Oh, and quickly, because of the massive plethora of musicians, the revolving lineup that has been Swans since its inception, I haven't really had time to go into the individual lineups for each album outside of the work of Jira and then Jarbo. Put your pitchforks down, please. I tried to put that information in and the guide just felt so bloated. So I've left it all out, and hopefully there's enough information here about the band, about the albums, the different periods, that if you're interested in finding out more, then you can go and discover that for yourself. Also, if there's anything you guys want to add to the community, then make sure you comment down below and we can get a bit of a collaboration going with more information and hopefully just enrich the experience of learning about this very interesting, very unique band. And here we go. Swans was formed by Michael Gira in New York City in 1982, and since then has gone through a swirling lineup of musicians that have helped collaborate and create his bleak landscapes and artistic visions that he's been drawn to. In his own words, Gira describes his choice of band name. Swans are majestic, beautiful looking creatures with really ugly temperaments. This just about sums up Swans' musical output, although in the early days, none of that beauty is flaunted and it's more a case of that ugly, brutal temperament, which we'll get to in a minute. Bear in mind quickly before I jump into their discography, I wouldn't suggest starting at the beginning if you've never heard a Swans record before. This music is difficult. It is difficult to get through, and I think you can listen to it with an air of appreciation and actually take a lot more out of it if you listen to some of the later periods. But yeah, just as a quick warning. The first ever Swans release was the EP Swans, which is kind of anomalous in the recording sound on the output of the band in the early 80s to mid 80s. It sounds a lot more like their no-wave contemporaries from New York City than it does the first album from there onwards. Despite that, you should check out the track Sensitive Skin if you want a feel for that early exploration of their sound. There's definitely some interesting stuff here. You can hear underneath there's this ragged brutality. It just doesn't come through on this songwriting, but it does come fully fledged on the next record. Speaking of which, debut album 1983's Filth. It's dark, nasty, brutal, and bleak. This sound was generated at the tail end of the no-wave scene, a really interesting time for music in New York City. It was a time where bands were kicking out against recycled popular music trends, but also this physical degradation of the city itself. At this time, there was a soaring crime rate, a lack of waste disposal schemes due to the tightening of the city's economic belt, and this generated music that touched on nihilism, exposing the underside of the city as a symptom of society's pitfalls. Though Swans is not probably strictly a no-wave band in this early phase, that insistent, unrelenting brutalism of Filth is clearly inspired by the no-wave scene. Bands like Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, Theoretical Girls, and Suicide. The difference was with Gira that he took that oppressive nihilism and he ramped it up a notch, relying solely on the force of rhythm, guitar, bass, and drums to convey the sickness and disgust. This record has two drummers on it, and alongside the bass lines pregnant with doom and the atonal grinding guitar work makes for a very difficult listen. In the next section, the curtain had fallen open slightly and white light was all over my face, making me look pretty stupid, and I didn't notice for about 4 minutes, so sorry about that. But what an experience it is. It's really satisfying to hear a band so assured in their relentless musical aesthetic, to the point where you actually feel exhausted by the end of the record, and it's an amazing feeling, and it's something Swans managed to do in their later years, but for a whole different reason, but we'll come to that later. Opening track Stay Here feels so off-kilter rhythmically, you can't quite work out if it's swung or it's straight, and that immediately disorients you as you're listening to the track. And before you know it, Jira's all over the track, spitting maniacally these anti-authoritarian vocals. Be strong, Be hard, resist temptation, stick your hand in your eye, close your fist, resist, walk on this line, look straight ahead, flex your muscles. Mid-album track Freak creates a cacophony of noise with this looping sample sound and wailing guitars and bass just punching you in the face insistently and then disappearing out and then coming back in and punching you in the face again. It's a difficult but rewarding experience, and that's the best way to describe this record as a whole. Rewarding in a kind of masochistic way though.
Oh, well done. Yeah, you finally noticed, you fucking idiot.
So the follow-up, 1984's Cop, took that brutal musical aesthetic and intensified the sludge factor. Jira slowed everything down, allowing the dirt and the grime to permeate in an even more despicable way. If I had to pick one I prefer, I would struggle to choose between Cop and Filth. But there's one thing for sure, and that is that Cop is the older, nastier brother of Filth. More hellish, more atonal, more bleak. Opening track Half-Life repeats the same 3-chord chromatic riff over and over again, followed by a screeching wail, and you have this drumming which is minimalist, but each hit really punctures, and bass so low, so deep it feels like it's just lurking beneath the rest of the framework of the song. I suppose you could say that Jira's vocals are slightly more melodic on this record. I mean, maybe comparatively anyway. They're still growling and swarming, but slightly less. I mean, second track Job has Jira telling somebody to cut off the arms, cut off the legs, cut off the head, get rid of the body, over the smashing of crash cymbals and this guitar squealing that lacks any kind of melody or structure. The near 7-minute title track is by far the most oppressive thing on here. It's ultra slow and it relishes every beat of its menacing tone. Jira's vocals: nobody hurts you like a cop with a club. Nobody rapes you like a cop with a club. Dark and hard work. During this time, the Young God EP was also released, which takes the barbaric sound of Filth and Cop and it allows for a little bit more experimentation. And this is the slow shift of the band beginning to just slightly tweak their sound and change it. And eventually we're looking at periods where it sounds altogether different. But at this point, the brutality is definitely still there. It's just been slightly reworked. The track Raping a Slave, yes, that's actually the title, is lyrically a little bit ambiguous. It's either about the people being raped by the capitalist system or perhaps the actual literal raping within an abusive relationship. Regardless of how you take the lyricism, it gives the track a real horrible edge, and that's only pushed by the discordant instrumentation that powers on throughout. The next release to come from Swans was the 1986 single Time Is Money (Bastard), and it's significant in the discography of Swans for 2 reasons. The first one being that it uses a sample of a nail gun, which comes almost close to a kind of dance beat, although a very brutal kind of dance beat, but also that sample, it gives the track more of an industrial bent, which is a move away from that really sludgy doom sound that Swans had on their first 2 records. It starts to lead them towards a slightly more industrial sound, which is noise, but it's a different kind of noise. The second reason is that the single is the first time that Jarbo features on a track. She is the most prolific collaborator and creator in Swans alongside Jira, and remains in the band until the mid-90s and the hiatus happens. Actually, alongside Jarbo and Jira, it's really important to mention guitarists Norman Westberg and Christoph Hahn, who have been a core element to Swans for almost all of its existence. They are key to providing inspiration and kinetic energy to Jira's songwriting. That industrial sound I was talking about, what it did is it engendered a new kind of experimentation for the band, and you can hear that on the B-side Sealed in Skin, which is grounded with piano chords, and the whole track is almost baroque in its glacial progression. Very different sound from the stuff we'd heard on Cop and Filth, and that steady progression to something new and altogether different for the band's sound and style. This style is pushed further on third LP, Greed, where Jarbo contributes her classically trained vocals as well as her keyboard skills, and this just gently pushes the band into a new direction. Opening track Fool, the sheer weight of the piano keys is palpable on this track. The way it's recorded is it picks up on that percussive timbre of the instrument, and it gives the whole track this feeling of it's really kinetic and claustrophobic. It's dread without the distortion. It's a more kind of creeping dread. Jira sings, "I'll crawl all over myself and stand in your shadow. I'll crawl all over myself and stand in your arms. I'll lie to myself. I'll lie to myself. By the time the first piece of percussion slams in on the second track, Anything for You, it sounds monolithic. The bass drum slam, it slightly distorts the soundscape and it mirrors the rhythm of those atonal, stark guitar chords. Essentially the same misanthropic, foreboding sound that the band used on the previous records, but the inclusion of Jarbo's equally anguished vocals and the inclusion of instrumentation like piano, it's slightly more reserved than the music of Cop and Filth, and it gives the music this, it feels like it's tightly wound. It has this sprung tension to it that could just go off at any moment, and that's a spaciousness that the instrumentation allows the music to have, which the albums like Filth and Cop don't have. It's a completely different, it's funny, the music is similar on the surface, but actually when you start listening to what the album makes you feel, it's very different in its approach. I guess another good way to put it is that there's like a crippling confinement when you listen to Filth and Cop, and Greed doesn't have that, but that tightly wound tension is there all the time. Track Heaven is a highlight here, a track that's so threatening in its percussive rattling and its sluggish instrumental stabs. I feel like I needed a cuddle after listening to this track. No, seriously, come here. Next LP, Holy Money, is like part 2 of Greed, also released in 1986, and the big difference here is that now Jarbo is featuring as a lead vocalist rather than just a backing vocalist, so clearly her presence within the band was considered a good thing. Her backing vocals on opening track A Hanging turn it from being primarily an atonal sludge fest to something that's almost transcendental. Her voice is angelic, and it feels like it's battling against the oppressiveness of the sonic atmosphere, and it gives the whole track a really nice light and dark dichotomy. Second track, You Need Me, is a ballad. Yeah, you heard me, a ballad. A beautifully breathy performance from Jarbo alongside these piano chords. And the track is really short at just over a minute long, but what it does is it allows room to breathe, and this is where Swans really starts to up the quality of their work. Now, you know, with earlier albums like Cop and Filth, the magic was their brutality and their unrelenting tone. You know, it didn't let up from start to finish. But where Swans really come into their own is where they start to employ dynamics and contrast, you know, when to push and when to pull. And what that does is that makes the moments of intensity so much more intense, but you can really appreciate those moments that are held back. And that's what this track, this ballad track, does on Holy Money. We also get a percussive reworking of the track Fool from Greed, and also a reworking of Money is Flesh as well. Oh, and the end of Another You is fantastic. It's these repetitive ascending guitar glissandos that burst into frenetic chromatic chords. Amazing. During this time, an EP titled Screw was released, and I mainly mention it because of the beautiful ballad track Blackmail, which takes its stylistic cue from the track You Need Me on Holy Money. It's another Jarbo ballad, and it's just great. In case you hadn't realised it, 1986 was a bloody busy year for the band. They also released the live album Public Castration is a Good Idea, which is a brilliant title, and the band have also made t-shirts with that on it, so if you're feeling brave, you should don one and walk around town and see what the reaction is. I imagine not good. It's worth listening to Public Castration is a Good Idea if you want to hear the intense tracks of Holy Money and Greed, but in an even more brutal fashion, and it's really worth checking this out. And Swans are so well known for their live performances, and this, I imagine this sort of period of Swans is at the point where the sound is just about to start changing and the contrast and the dynamics are coming in, so really you can hear the utter deafening quality of the band at this point on this record. So now we reach 1987, and one of the best, if not perhaps the best, Swans album in their entire discography is released, Children of God. At this point, the transformation of the band's sonic footprint happens in earnest, and as I said earlier, this allows a more exploratory, forward-thinking environment for the music to flourish. On Holy Money, the inclusion of Jarbo's vocals invited new instrumentation such as acoustic guitar and piano that we hadn't heard in previous Swans sounds, and Children of God takes those instrumentations and it allows it to be untethered from the previous Swans experience, and that's what allows this goddamn masterpiece to shine. Opening track New Mind harnesses the arcane heaviness of the Swans sound, but it filters it down to something a bit more streamlined and direct. It's still caustic, there's still a caustic sound there, but that caustic guitar chord sound is separated from the space of the bass and the drums, and it gives the feeling of the track an overall spaciousness, a bit like what I talked about on the production of Greed and Holy Money. You know, it's still bleak and it's still difficult, but it's just more refined. Jira's vocal performance on this track is brilliant. It has a real swagger to it and it has this call and response to him and the rest of the band. I will be there, I will be there. When he calls my number, I will be there. Let the light come in. Damn you to hell, let the light come in. This is probably one of their best tracks, especially because it descends into swirling noise and billowing sounds at the end of the track. Second track, In My Garden, it reveals the binary nature of this record and also the genius of the track listing on this, but more on that in a minute. The track is mournful, clean guitar and lilting piano accompanying Jarbo's eerie yet sensual voice. And the reason the track works so well is that it's a breather after being smashed around the head for the duration of the first track. So here's how I see this record. After the violent opening and then the gentle follow-up, the rest of the tracks on this album coalesce into tense variations of restraint, going from violent to beautiful, and that's an ebb and flow that this record has, and it gives the entire album a static energy. It's electric. Track Sex God Sex has those familiar, languid guitar stabs and glacial drum hits, but Jira's vocals here are so exhausted, he sounds like a man on the verge of collapsing. The lyrics here manifest the theme of the overall album. It's the colossal power of religious fervour. Now that's not to say that you need to be religious to appreciate it, and it's not saying that Jira is religious either. It's just he has an appreciation for the power that a faith can have, and that's the overall atmosphere that's conveyed across the lyricism and the musical power of this album. I will beg you, Lord, and I will pray for you to forgive me now. I will go down to the centre of the earth and I will curl up in flames and I will beg you, Lord. I tell you what, the final section of this track is about as unequivocally sublime as Swans music gets. It shakes me to my core every time. Everything is just incredible here, but another track I have to mention is the bluesy tornado of Blood and Honey. Just go and listen to that track. Unbelievable record and a brilliant start if you want an introduction to the band, in my opinion. Then we get the '88 live album Feel Good Now, which is great if you want to hear the awe-inspiring power that Children of God has in a live setting. Then in 1989, we probably get the worst record in the Swans discography. I mean, there had to be one, right? And it's Burning World. And it's not a bad record per se. I think there's good things about it, but I guess it's the problem with following up a record like Children of God and the style being so wildly different. I mean, tellingly, it's probably the most far away from the Swan sound as they get, and perhaps that says something about its lack of heftiness within the discography. It just doesn't really stand out amidst all of these really brilliant records. On this album, the band entirely eschew that distortion and heavy approach, and they go for a Gothic neo-folk sound. This change in tack came about for a number of reasons. I mean, the first being Jira's apparent tiredness for making heavy, difficult music, but also his and Jarbo's musical project World of Skin, which gave birth to projects like Blood, Women, Roses, Shame, Humility, Revenge, and 10 Songs for Another World. And these projects changed Jira's approach and way of thinking about his songwriting process, and that's what we get when we get The Burning World. Alongside this, they did a cover of Love Will Tear Us Apart, bizarre as fuck, and that actually garnered them a lot of mainstream attention, and eventually they were signed by MCA, which became Universal. I imagine that the suits at something like Universal were quite happy with having a more pared down Swans, a more manageable sound, and what they did get was Swans' most accessible record to date. I think there's a bit of uncertainty here when you listen to the record, and Yes, that makes sense because it's so far away from the original Swans sound. It's like an exploration and a new opportunity for the band and Gira to exercise a new kind of songwriting style. I think what it ends up sounding like is a prototype for Gira's side project Angels of Light, which comes in the Swans hiatus, and that does that neo-folk Americana sound a lot better than this does. But you know, having said that, there's still some good tracks on this record. I love Mona Lisa Mother Earth with a jangly, folky strut, and it manages to create an unsettling atmosphere without the requisite guitar distortion you'd expect, and the foreboding dread of the early Swans releases. God Damn the Sun is a great track as well. Oh, I should probably mention before I continue that there's basically a live album after every single LP release, but I'm not going to mention them all because I'll be here forever, and I think it's more important to base this guide around the LPs than it is the live releases too. If I had hours to talk, then I would include everything, but I think people might get a little bit bored, so I'm going to stick to the LPs. But just remember when you're checking out Swans, or if you feel like you've listened to everything and you don't know where to go next, that check out the live albums that come after each LP release, because you get to see a different incarnation of Swans in a live setting, which is quite a fascinating thing. So we hit 1991 and we get White Light from the Mouth of Infinity. God damn, this is a good album. Interestingly, Gira in the past has thought quite ill of this record and its follow-up Love of Life, and he had this to say about it. I'm ambivalent about much of it, but then what do I know? Some of it is genuinely good, I think. Anyway, I was learning how to write a song as I went. These two records were even used as part of a 1999 compilation that Gira released called Various Failures. Well, Mr. Gira, I'm pleased to report that you're wrong, because this album is great. This record is another progression on from 1989's Burning World and previous Swans records, but what the band does is it builds on the stylistic trappings and the Gothic overtones of the previous album, and they create a record that demands attention. The music on this record is almost nimble-footed, and what I mean by that is that when you're listening, your ear's constantly being pricked up to these unusual melodies and the bright tone of the production that you wouldn't necessarily expect on a Swans record up until this point. By bright, though, I don't mean positive. The lyrics and the musicality is still just as misanthropic and foreboding as previous records are. I mean, just check out these lyrics from Gira. I'm so glad I'm better than you. I'm so glad I'm better than you are. I can see clearly through this veil of reality, and I can remember the feel of your skin. No, you never knew me and you never will. When nothing's there, nothing is concealed. But there is a brightness in the production, and there's more space between the individual instrumentations. I feel like you're more aware of what's going on instrumentally on this record because the production of the record pushes you to listen to each individual instrument more than it has previously. That idea of a higher contrast within the music is echoed in that garish but almost beautiful artwork. I mean, I want this thing on my wall. Almost, maybe I'll be a little bit too creeped out every time I look at it. It's something about it that just attracts me. When I first saw all of the Swans album arts in a row, you know, White Light to the Mouth of Infinity and Love of Life are the first ones that you will yourself towards, because look at the brightness, look at the texture and the tone of that album art, and for me that's how the music presents itself also. The brightness hits you immediately in opening track Better Than You. You have the gargles of a baby at the beginning before the band shifts into this eerie sound, and they jump keys, which does add to that brightness. It's strange getting a key change, not really again something you'd hear from Swans' earlier work. But what that does is that gives the feeling that the track has like a verse-chorus binary structure, which is, again, not something you'd expect on a Swans record to this point. It just sounds nothing like anything they'd done up until this point, which makes it a very exciting introduction to a record. A lot of Gira's songwriting exists in the realm of repetition, glacial changes, but this is pretty much flipped on its head on this track. I mean, until the end where you get the endless repetition of We're Better Than You. Song for Dead Time is a chilling acoustic guitar-led track with this flute and interjecting synth part. Jarbo's vocals, as always, are sublime on this track, commanding the atmosphere and gently leading the track to its slow fading conclusion. Now the past is untrue, and this breath is a lie, and the sun is an emptiness that burns through the sky, and this ground, it will slide down into the sea, and when this body dies, no man will ever breathe one word of ignorance for me. Blind takes that neo-folk sound from Burning World and creates a really stunningly emotional track. It's brimming with emotion, and the key to that emotion is Gira's barbed baritone voice. It's just a great track and emblematic of a really great album. The band releases Body to Body, Job to Job in 1991, which is a compilation of live recordings and, interestingly, tape loops, which gives an indication to the one of the explorations the band would have in the mid-90s, but more on that later. In 1992, we get the follow-up to White Light, Love of Life. Jesus, that artwork has got so much more haunting. Musically, this is very much part two of White Light. It's another record that's very haunting, and it's characterized by its Gothic atmosphere, its neo-folk instrumentation, its bright production sound, and its approach of subtlety as well. For me, this record doesn't quite stand up to the quality of White Light, and I don't know if that's just because I'd heard White Light first, and therefore this sound is a continuation of that sound. I just feel like the individual tracks on White Light are more impressive than what's on here. One of the most interesting developments on this record is the inclusion of sampling and interludes, which we hadn't seen before. And even there's one of the interludes, part 3, is the vocal sample of a man talking about his journey through the wilderness, which gives this completely new atmosphere to the music. On the brilliant track Her, a sample of 12-year-old Jarbo reading out her diary entries is used, and this experimentation of using sampling loops and field recordings and kind of using them as a collage along with the music, it's very provoking and an interesting entry to Swans' sound. And it's not perfected here, it's done later into the 90s, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that does add a new depth to this album that White Light doesn't have. Track Amnesia straddles two worlds, and it's probably my favourite track on the album, and it has this metallic thrum of paranoia, but then it's like a folky, catchy dance sound to it as well. It's very bizarre, and it's definitely worth a listen. The next LP from the band is 1995's The Great Annihilator, and it's a return to the hard edge of the Swans sound, not the caustic work of the early 80s, but certainly more brutal than the last 4 records they had released. It seems like a lot of fans see this as Swans' masterpiece, and I can certainly appreciate that viewpoint. It's an album where Gira, Jarbo and co harness that hypnotic expression, the anger, the lust of previous Swans incarnations, and they create an album that is expressive and hypnotic and beautiful, and it's only pushed forward because of the sonic experimentation of previous albums like White Light, Love of Life, The Burning World, Children of God. The whole record has an incredible sense of pace and flow, probably more so than any other Swans record up until this point. You have hypnotic, shadowy phrases and repetitions that seep from one into the other. It's probably one of Swans' most accessible releases too. The songs on average work out to be between 4 and 5 minutes long, and each one's quite a tidy idea without sacrificing the overall cohesion of the album. That industrial bent is captured most obviously through the punchy and echoed percussion production, and you can hear that really effectively on the opening track with flattened tom hits. You have a snare that's unlatched from the snare wires, and it really booms. It's so colossal when it's hit, and you have this chiming bell that just cuts through everything, and everything just sounds so physical, and it's what gives it that industrial sound. Alongside the hazy repeated guitar chords and what sounds like a gale force wind, the track manages to sound hypnotic and subtly vicious, and the track actually fades out to a laughing baby sound, which is obviously quite unsettling. Shut up. Celebrity Lifestyle is almost a straight-up paranoid rock track. It has this confident strut to it, the instrumentation is very bright, but Gira's low tone and his lyrics manage to drag the track just under the surface of respectability, which is a really clever thing to do. Yeah, her celebrity life, and she's just a drug addiction and a self-reflecting image of a narcotized mind. And she ties her naked children up with wires and lace. Oh, her celebrity lifestyle is the product of a celebrity mind. Oh, her celebrity mouth is the perfect image of the end of time. Mother Father has an incredible growling performance from Jarbo. You can really hear her anger through that hostile snarl as she repeats the word ride over and over again until the track just reduces to dust. One of my personal favourite tracks on here is Where Does a Body End, which recalls the neo-folk of albums like The Burning World and White Light to the Mouth of Infinity. It has these acoustic guitar arpeggios that just catch against the rounded distortion. I guess there's nothing particularly special about this track really, it's just, music music sometimes does that. This track always catches me when I listen to the album. So I'm interested to know what you guys think about it. So another masterpiece. How the hell do they do it? I don't know. In '96, the band released the EP Died Seer. It's Zoo. It's German for the door is closed. Anyway, I can't really pronounce German words, clearly. And it was a hint of things to come from the next LP. And what came was Soundtracks for the Blind, quite possibly the masterpiece of the entire Swans oeuvre. It's just a triumph in every sense of the word. A double album of fleeting glances, cerebral atmospheres, deep intensity, contrary emotions, and touching beauty. Just some words there that really fail to do justice to this incredible record. This record combines the intensity of previous releases and it pushes the experimentation of the band to dizzying new heights, working alongside sampling and using it more than ever before, but also utilising ambient soundscapes for the first time and really making that a core part of the sound on this record. Gira did a really great interview with Jonathan Greer from Slow Thrills about the frustration he felt with trying to combat the presupposed notion of Swans as a band and trying to escape the box that people have put them in from that early 80s sound. You know, people were aware of that late period no-wave sound that Swans were pushing, that industrial, brooding, foreboding, doom and gloom, difficult work, and Soundtracks for the Blind isn't that, and he was frustrated that he was not able to escape the shackles of that sound. Unfortunately, the name is charged with negative energy and our new music has to battle with people's preconceptions and indifference. I guess it has become more of a burden than a benefit, although I think the music has grown and, especially over the last two albums, has become more interesting. If people think that it's bashing, crashing, ugliness and doom and gloom, then they're never going to listen to it. That's a great interview, by the way. I'll put the link in the description so you can go and read the whole thing for yourselves. It's a shame if people did stay away from Soundtracks for the Blind because of their notions of the earlier Swan sound that they didn't like, because honestly this is completely different to anything else they'd ever done. A good way to look at Soundtracks is the lost soundtrack of a film that was never made, and that comes through from the things like the startling vocal samples that often begin in media res, as if you're supposed to understand the context, but obviously you don't. The semblance of a musical theme that permeates its way through the entire record. Moments that feel like they demand a visual context because they have such a striking resonance to them. Like, I want to see the film that has this music as a soundtrack to it. That's the feeling this gives me when I listen to it. I want to see the scene from this non-existent film where the stunning track Live Through Me narrates over the top. I could just listen to that track on repeat for hours and hours. The opening track, Red Velvet Corridor, is a dense landscape of naturalistic and electronic drones. And I remember when I first listened to this record, I was so surprised by this opening because I'd only heard Children of God and Greed at that point, and this was so very different from those albums. I mean, a piece of ambient gold like this, it feels like it wouldn't be out of place on a Biosphere record or Stars of the Lid or Monolake. The first traditional track, if you can call anything Swans does traditional, it is track 3, Helpless Child. Ethereal synths give way to a swirling scape, acoustic guitar, and Gira in one of his most lamentable iterations. Protect me from violence. Hold me in your cool lips. You'll drug me with kindness, so I can pretend I exist. Now you be the only child. I'll suck on your breast. You'll feed me with gasoline. I'll burn my name in your head. Light on laughs. The theme reappears as the track The Sound on the second disc, and this time it develops into a sepulchral wall of fervour before simmering back down into Gira's acoustic guitar and voice. It is electric. Not the guitar. The guitar is acoustic. The atmosphere is electric. I shouldn't have used the word electric. Anyway, of all the records, I really feel like I cannot do this record justice by sitting here and talking about it. Hopefully this has convinced you to go and listen to this album, and I think you should really go and do that, but I haven't got enough time to go through it to every little intricacy of this record. I will probably do this as a Deep Cuts Essential at some point in the future because I would love to sit here and talk about this album for forever and ever. So look out for that at some point in the future. But yeah, go and listen to Soundtracks for the Blind because, wow. Is all I have to say. Wow. And that was it for Swans for a long time. We get the double live album Swans Are Dead, just to dispel any rumours. Thanks for that, we understand. And everyone went off on their separate ways and worked on their own projects. In that time we get a few Swans compilation releases, and Gira went on to front his Angels of Light Americana neo-folk side project, which is definitely worth checking out, but I don't have time to. In fact, he did a shed load of stuff really, but I just don't have time to talk about it in this video. Then, for the first time in 14 years, in 2010 we get a new Swans record, My Father Will Guide Me Up a Rope to the Sky. The new lineup that was formed is the lineup that remains to this day and is currently touring the Glowing Man album, and it exists as Christoph Hahn on lap steel guitar and guitar, also in Swans between 82 to 97, Christopher Pravdika on bass, first time in the band, Thor Harris on drums, dulcimer, vibraphone and keyboard, also first time in the band, Phil Pulio, also on drums and dulcimer, in Swans also between 95 and 97. Norman Westberg on guitar, he was also active in the band between 83 and 95. And of course the man in the cowboy hat, Michael Gira. Actually, as a quick note, Thor is no longer touring with Swans and has been replaced with Paul Wallfish. Notably, no Jarbo, as she was busy with her own solo career, but she does turn up and do some guest vocals on the next album, and also she turned up live for a couple of performances as well. You couldn't really get much further from Soundtracks for the Blind. The songwriting on My Father has the punch of a record like The Great Annihilator, just without the industrial streak. There's definitely a heaviness here, but it has a more naturalistic slant to it, and part of that is the bluesy streak that these songs are written with. You can hear this clearest on My Birth, an absolute belter of a track, which is like a cross between the stoner rock of Kiss and the grassy blues of someone like, I don't know, J.J. Cale or something. Maybe not, I don't know. But it's just, it's got that that bluesy feeling to it, and it also has this sludgy, rocky, confident tone. This record has some beautiful instrumental flourishes that really push that bluesy rock flavour. We've got a mandolin, hammer dulcimer, 12-string acoustic guitar, even an ebow on the track Inside Madeline. The echoing clank of grand piano and the pitched squeal of a trumpet on the end of You Fucking People Make Me Sick. It's such an amazing end to a track that began with a gentle mandolin strumming and call and response vocals from Devendra Banhart, a guest vocalist, and his child. It's just inspired madness. This album seems to be thought of as the weak sibling of the Swans Revivals albums, but to me it's a shining example of the way the band are able to synthesize their songwriting and instrumental talents and create something that has so much energy to it. This album's really life-affirming. I think it's got such a power to it that people aren't appreciating because of what came after it. The funereal ballad Little Mouth that closes out the record, the deep rut of Eden Prison. There's great tracks on here, and that rock blues swagger works so well. It's a record that shouldn't be underestimated in their discography. So, The Seer, a behemoth of a record at 119 minutes long. It takes the instrumentation of 2010's My Father and the repetition of Soundtracks for the Blind, although this time the repetition isn't tape loops or ambience, it's live performed, which gives it this menacing hypnotic quality that really is what permeates through the rest of these three records we're going to be talking about. Something about the songwriting and the instruments used makes the whole thing feel so medieval to me. I can't describe it, it just sounds deeply anachronistic, like it's from the 14th century, despite the fact I know that medieval music from our time didn't sound anything like this, but maybe it's from like a parallel reality or something. Maybe it's from the dark timeline where everyone's a Satanist. Seriously though, whilst on the surface it might appear softer, The Seer is probably the most unsettling Swans record. It fluxes between restrained magnificence and necrotic incantations in a way that tugs you and pulls at you, and it just leaves you feeling exhausted, but in the best way. And this is what I was talking about when I was speaking about the earlier albums. You're exhausted from this album in an entirely different way to the short form brutalism of the early records. This is it's sustained and it takes a long time, and by the time you reach the end of that record you just feel utterly knackered basically. Opening track Lunacy begins with this two-note guitar chord repeated ad nauseum, eventually joined by a descending atonal piano melody, and then the thrum of the entire band washes in. Hey, the reason I mentioned Incantations just now, it's so prescient on this track. You have guest vocalist Alan Spearhawk and Mimi Parker, and they're displaying their best mystical choral powers. They're hauntingly reciting these lyrics. In the mind of no one, forming sun, forming love, break the chain, hide within, innocence, not innocent, innocent in no sense, eat the beast, keep him in, take the blame, speak the name, lunacy, lunacy. Second track, Mother of the World, repeats the same riff until you feel genuinely nauseous. It feels like time is fragmenting and you're just disappearing into some sort of purgatorial abyss. Seriously, if you listen to this with headphones on and the lights off, I guarantee you'll get the disorienting sense of falling not long after the track has started. Tracks like The Daughter Brings the Water and Song for a Warrior exercises that graceful restraint that the band are capable of in this incarnation. And there's even a guest vocalist from Karen O of the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Final track, Apostate, is one of the most intense musical experiences I've probably ever had. It's a thrashing din of fury and power. It's hellish and nightmarish, and you just need to go and experience it. Just go and experience the whole album because it is incredible. So, hot off the intense touring cycle of the Seer and now on everybody's must-see list live because of their intense live performances, Swans in 2014 released To Be Kind, an album that somehow surpasses the quality of the Seer, and it stands up there with albums like Children of God and Soundtracks for the Blind. This is another masterpiece. Again, another fucking masterpiece. This is another double album, clocking in at just over 2 hours long, and it starts to build on the expanse of the Seer, and it experiments with a slightly different songwriting technique. This time it focuses more on groove and riffs. It has like an attacking blues presence. The best way of describing it, I guess, would be some of the songwriting of 2010's album My Father, but it added onto the framework, the maximalist framework of an album like the Seer. The album begins with Screenshot, one of their best tracks, and it's such an unforgiving repetition of this three-note melody. It just gets stuck in the rut of this groove and it just insistently bores its way into your head. I was lucky enough to see them live last year in London, and they stretched this track out for about 24-25 minutes, and it's such an intense experience. Second track, Just a Little Boy for Chester Burnett, is a 12-minute odyssey of swampy coagulate. The thing just trickles and seeps in such a languorous way, and the only thing that cuts through are these sampled cackles and these soaring shouts. It feels like this record gets back some of that industrial tone. If you listen to the production on the track Little God in My Hands, the string instruments are so bright and the snare and hi-hats really jagged. And speaking of this track as well, about 90 seconds in, there's this hellish cacophony of brass instruments. It just explodes, and it scared the shit out of me when I first listened to it, so fair warning for you if you haven't heard it and you're going to go and listen to it. The grand sweeping centre of this track is the 34-minute Bring the Sun Toussaint Louverture. Those of you that don't know, Toussaint Louverture was the leader of the Haitian Revolution in the late 1700s and the inspiration for Jira's lyricism on this track. Haiti is just a fulcrum for everything horrible and good. It has this intense magical belief which is pretty amazing, and it's been the subject of exploitation and violence since the beginning. But it was also the site of the first successful slave revolt. That slave revolt resulted in Napoleon needing money very badly and consenting to the Louisiana Purchase, which changed the course of modern history. It's a terrible place that capitalist pigs have exploited into ruin, and Haitians, of course, have exploited each other, like all humans. This is a track of two acts, the first a hypnotic, swimming dirge, and the second a difficult collage of sounds and rhythms that scrape up against each other, and they sound like they take a layer of skin as they go. Track Oxygen is the screenshot of the second disc. You have this deeply repetitious, minimally melodic riff that has a twisted blues crunch to it, and over the top of that you have the dexterous drum beat of Phil Puleo. It's a really great track. To Be Kind is every bit the masterpiece that Children of God and Soundtracks for the Blind is. It's both engrossing and terrifying in equal measure, and I feel like music of this quality should be mandatorily listened to so people can experience that edifying power that this music has. And now, unbelievably, we reached the final Swans record, 2016's The Glowing Man. This closes out the trilogy of insanely brilliant double albums that prove that Michael Gira and Swans are capable of creating mind-expanding, apoplectic, distinctive albums that have a real lasting power, and thankfully the Glowing Man continues that tradition. After the explosive blues punk sound of To Be Kind, Swans decide to end this period of their legacy with an album that champions sustain and reflection. It's all about creating melancholic soundscapes that swirl around Jira's incantations and lycanthropic howls. There's literally nothing ephemeral about this record. In fact, it's probably the antithesis of that idea. Listen to the opening track, Cloud of Forgetting, and you've got this soporific meditation with glittering guitars and Jira chanting. Breathing, reaching, leaving, reaching. God, oh God, I'm leaving, I'm leaving. Surrender, surrender, take us, take us. This is probably one of my favourite vocal performances from Jira, especially when he gets quite lofty towards the end of the track. It just reminds me of how much of a great vocal range this man has. I mean, you know, he does the really low grumbling sound on some performances, and then you have these loftier parts. And it also reminds you that he's very capable of utilising his voice to suit the music and the atmosphere that he's creating. You know, he might not have the perfect voice, but his sound and his style fits that music absolutely perfectly. Central piece Frankie M is 20 minutes long, and it's another two-part song. You've got the first part, which is this massive echoing wall of noise, and then that settles into a far more restrained fusion of rim taps, bobbing bass, gentle guitars, ride cymbals, and it reminds you of the physicality of the instrumentation here. This is being played by people. This isn't loops, this isn't samples, this is real people performing this music. When Will I Return is a haunting piece of music, both instrumentally but also because of the subject matter. The piece is sung by Jennifer Jira, Michael's wife, and the lyrics recall a time where she was sexually assaulted. The evocative violins glissando alongside Jennifer singing, "His hands are on my throat, my key is in his eye. I'm splayed here on some curb, shards of glass, a starry night. When will this pigman stop?" As the track picks up, Jennifer begins to defiantly sing "Oh, I'm Alive," as if confronting her rapist face to face. An intense piece of music whereby restraint is utterly key to its power. And that really sums up this record, a dense double album of repetitions and atmospheres that wholeheartedly deserves its place alongside the utter classics of the Swans discography. And that's it. This has been a bloody long video, but I really wanted to cover as much as I possibly could, although I'm still aware there's so much I couldn't include because we'd have been here for years. So if you want to include anything to enlighten the community with, make sure you put it in the comments section below. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but I've done a Spotify playlist as always with all the tracks I've spoken about, so make sure you go to that and follow me on Spotify at Deep Cuts Playlists. Follow me at Deep Cuts Tweets on Twitter because I like to chat with the people that already follow me. We have a bit of a back and forth going on, discussing new albums and things like that. It's always a lot of fun, so make sure you add me. And next time I will be back with the Deep Cuts Essentials video, another Deep Cuts Essentials video, so look out for that next week or the week after. See you then.